All set? Great. So welcome to the second session of the community journalism track for Radically Rural. We are delighted to have a wonderful panel of journalists together to discuss the philanthropic possibilities for supporting our journalism and our journalists. What was once considered only the realm of traditional charitable nonprofits, we now see great and innovative strides centered on community support of local news organizations. It does not matter the size of your operation, there are opportunities to consider, and often that will come from your readers. I wanted to share an example of that support and why asking our communities for help has merit. One of our reporters in our monthly letters to our readers wrote this yesterday. I've dealt with this on several occasions over the last year and a half, but there's one example that stands out. It happened last spring when I hired someone to do a job at my house. I met him at the front door and he wasn't wearing a mask, but he held one in his hand and I asked that he put it on while he was in my home, which earned me a dirty look, but he obliged. After a few minutes, the man casually asked what I did for work. I was a bit nervous given his annoyance with my request for him to mask up, but I told him anyway. I'm a reporter for the Keene Sentinel, I said. I cover health. He didn't respond with a chuckle under his breath or a soft snicker. He looked me right in the eyes and laughed out loud. He then asked what kind of stories I write. I used to primarily cover the opioid epidemic and mental health issues, I told him, afraid of where this was going. But now I'm mostly covering the local impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. He laughed again. Well, who are your sources? Local infectious disease experts mostly, I said, but I also reference places like the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the World Health Organization. Another laugh. He went on to say things I've heard way too many times. COVID-19 is a hoax, health organizations can't be trusted, and journalists have an agenda. I bit my tongue, but by the time he left, I was beginning to break down. I asked my boyfriend how this kept happening and why people can't understand that reporters are working for the people, not against them. So that's a great question, one answered immediately by a number of our readers that very same day. Quote, "Thank you for your letter," wrote one woman, "and for the information you provide to our community. There's a lot of misinformation going around these days, and sometimes it is hard to know what the truth is. That is why I stay off social media, and I do rely on the articles I read in my newspaper," end quote. Another reader said, "Both my husband and I appreciate the Sentinel and its reporters and the great work that you do. Rest assured, you and others at the Sentinel have our thanks for your timely and accurate reporting. Journalism is a demanding profession to be in, but at its best, its contribution to society has immense value that we desperately need. You can be proud of the work you do, and we thank you for your courage and perseverance. Be well and write." I think these comments tell us something, that our work has value, not with everyone, but with many, and that these same people might be willing to support us beyond a subscription. And further, that there are foundations and large donors who, just like these same folks, see the importance of our work and can imagine the loss of community and more that would happen without us. Just a side note to that, I received an email from that reporter today. She's received 80 responses to that letter, only 2 were negative. Frank Mudgem is the Chief Innovation Officer for the Local Media Association, which works with more than 3,000 local media brands, as well as several hundred R&D partners in the industry. Frank leads LMA's Center for Journalism Funding, focused on developing philanthropic and collaborative models for support of local journalism. Prior to joining LMA, Frank was Knight Professor of Practice in TV News Innovation at Arizona State University's Cronkite School of Journalism. His extensive media experience includes radio, print, TV production, and digital. It's a pleasure to have Frank with us this afternoon to talk about LMA's work and how it's possible for rural news organizations to find additional sources of support. I will have Frank introduce his great panel. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Terry. And a great anecdote to start off. It's great to be part of Radically Rural. And if I had a headline, it's that size doesn't matter, or actually size does matter. And you know, for those serving smaller communities, actually, philanthropy, small contributions can have big outsized impact. And so excited to share with all of you today learnings from the first LMA Lab for Journalism funding, and even more excited to have 3 publishers who can give you their firsthand experiences from the lab. And we hope that our lessons and learnings can be scaled and used by publishers across the country, because to Terry's example, in my 38 years, which is a scary number to say out loud, of working in journalism, I've never felt that our work is more important than it feels today. We've got challenges, not just with funding journalism, but we've got challenges with information and trust in our communities. And so now more than ever, our communities need us as news organizations to be healthy, to be there for them and provide reliable information. And so the LMA Lab for Journalism funding was created to test the theory that there were business models out there for-profit organizations, not just nonprofits, that really could help ensure that we continue to be able to provide that kind of information at a hyper local level. So first principle of journalism funded by philanthropy is thank your funders. And so the lab would not have been possible without support from Google News Initiative. So thank you so much to Google for making that possible. You know, the headlines from our lab is that it was a 9-month lab funded from GNI with 16 publishers, and over the course of that 6 months of curriculum and then 3 more months of fundraising, $5 million raised for local journalism. Dramatic pause. Yeah, if you're watching remotely, you can clap in your home office. I mean, I hope it's an eye-popping number. It was eye-popping for us. Joaquina Alvarado, who was instrumental, has worked with the Seattle Times on their philanthropy efforts and helped develop the curriculum for the lab. I mean, he and I were talking, and he pointed out that's, depending on the market size you're in, that's easily 100 local journalist jobs. That's impact, and we know what a difference that can make. So the natural follow-up question for any good journalist would be, how did you do that? So that's what we hope to share today, is lessons and takeaways from how these publishers did that. So the TLDR is what you'll get today. For those interested, we'll provide information, a free downloadable industry white paper that we wrote 42 pages of case studies and lessons from the first lab for journalism funding that really detail how the publishers did what they did, and lessons that are repeatable and scalable to markets big and small. But I'm happy to share the highlights today. I'm even happier to be able to have the 3 publishers you see to my right share their experiences in small markets like Biloxi, Mississippi, Bozeman, Montana, and Nogales, Arizona. And I think that they're not just their successes, but also some of their hard lessons learned are really relevant to the radically rural audience. So with that, I'll dive in. So 7, it's more like 8 lessons, but so what we learned, first of all, some things about what philanthropy is not. I call it the whatnots. It's not a handout. And I have to say, in our lab, we had mostly editorial leaders. And the first couple calls we found were really more of a therapy session. If you're an editor, it is natural to feel like having a conversation about philanthropy funding your journalism is some kind of indicator of failure. Like it's some last resort and you did something wrong and now you have to ask for a handout or a bailout. So we talked a lot about aren't interested in being seen as ATMs, and kind of the need to rewire our own thinking as journalists when it comes to the role that philanthropy can play, and really thinking about the relationship with funders as a partnership, not a handout, and how our journalism can actually help drive community good and also funder goals in a way that's aligned for everyone. So it's not a handout. It's also not just for nonprofits. I mean, I come up from the broadcast side, where if you're in public media, right? This is we've all been watching our favorite show and had the interruption of you can't continue watching until we do the 30-minute pledge drive. So this is old hat and old news if you're in public media, but for-profit publishers, I think this is a foreign concept. And then, ironically, in our lab, we found it's also for many community foundations and other funders, it's actually a bit of an odd conversation to approach them and ask them to fund a for-profit news operation. And so both on the publisher side, but also on the funder side, that is a work in progress. And so it is not exclusively the domain of nonprofits. In fact, I would say, coming out of our lab, that the proper way to center that conversation isn't, are you for-profit or nonprofit? It's actually, are you community-centered and doing civic journalism? Or, not to be too harsh, are you a corporate overlord squeezing every penny of efficiency and you might as well be making widgets? That's the distinction. And I am proud to say I know many for-profit news organizations that from the very top are highly committed to community service journalism. And those are absolutely good candidates for philanthropic projects. This last piece, and I think you'll hear from our publishers a little more on this, is a little bit of, I think we just have to have some frank talk, not just because I'm named Frank, about our tendency to focus on ourselves and our problems. And that's not a very good pitch to a funder or to anyone in your community. Because guess what? Everyone has their own problems, right? So one of the other early lessons from our lab was to recenter the conversation away from, I've lost reporting positions and I have budget challenges, which is true. It's absolutely true. And particularly in rural areas, I mean, the news desert problem is real. We should all be very concerned about it. The way to solve it isn't to, pardon my French, whine about, I've got a lot of problems. It's to talk about the opportunity through journalism to do civic good. And that is a proactive and community-centered response. And so it's really important to check. I have to say, we are journalists and we love words. My Twitter handle is Frank Words. So our language matters. And so language that emphasizes our problems and our business challenges misses the opportunity to really engage with both community and funders around aligned goals and unity of purpose. So, some top line, before you even go down the road of philanthropy, here's what it isn't. So what are the five principles we saw really drive results? And you'll hear more on each of these from the three publishers. It starts with listening and being community-centered. And in our lab, we actually had the publishers, they may say, I don't know, I'll find out in a minute, forced the publishers to engage in an active community listening tour, which, I think I can speak for many journalists I've known who are like, well, we know what the news is. We know what people need. We know what people want. And I think, again, we have to check ourselves on some of those assumptions. And for those who heard the terrific presentation earlier today on trusting news and building trusted news, the themes are the same, which is how are you engaging and involving your community in identifying what are the critical issues and problems your community needs you to address through your journalism. And so we were quite intentional about having newsrooms engage in a community listening process. It gives you a much better answer when you fund and describe a project you want to tackle journalism. And they ask, how do you know the community needs that? You have a better answer. And then the process of engaging in that listening tour helps you uncover allies and potentially also even funders and expand not only the network of funding potential, but to another point we heard in our earlier session, better represent all the voices in your community, not just some of the usual suspects that you usually interview. So it starts with listening, and then it's focused on civic good. I have made the claim that pursuing journalism funded by philanthropy actually makes us better journalists, because there is a lot of noise in a newsroom. There's a lot of stuff that we cover. In my broadcast background, I'll be the first to say, the 11 o'clock historic tendency to lead with crime, that I understand maybe why that happened editorially at the time, but that at the end of the day isn't the core of the value we deliver to our communities. And when you can't do everything and your funding is tight, this actually helps us refocus on the essential values that we do provide for our community. So the best funder projects focus on civic good, not on things that we decide we should impose on the community. I will also say it was great to discover, and I think you'll hear from the three publishers more on this, legacy, in my experience, is a phrase that gets paired with media in 100% negative way these days. Like, you do not want to be part of the sentence where somebody says legacy media ... Generally that sentence ends badly. I wish to contest that way of thinking, and that one thing our publishers saw, and this I think is especially true for a group like Radically Rural, is you're in the community that you serve and in most cases have been there for a long time. You have a legacy that is valuable, and it's a legacy of community service and community impact. And so in an earlier presentation, we heard the exhortation to tell your own story. I think journalists are great at telling the stories of the people in their community. We've probably not done as good a job as we need to do at telling our own story of value and impact. And so it's really important actually to tap into the legacy that you have in your community. And I think you'll hear examples of how that actually has led to funding for some of our smaller publishers. And then the last 2 points, journalists, the editorial team in newsroom, I mean, we are, I think, and have been historically rightly concerned about not being seen as advocates, right? When we're talking about trust in news, one of those components is that people see us as neutral reporters and observers, not having a point of view. At the same time, we have to check our tendency to feel like the journalism is done when we hit publish, or when we go to print, or when we air the story. Because it's easy to make the argument that actually the story journey only begins once it becomes public, right? And so it matters the kind of impact that our reporting has. And while we're not in the business of promising or guaranteeing the impact of future reporting, we absolutely, in our communities, can look to a track record of the kinds of ways that our reporting has made our communities better, and the impact that reporting has had in changing lives, holding the powerful accountable, resulting in policy and law changes. So focusing on impact is something that I think journalists tend not to do, but it really is persuasive when it comes to funder conversations. And then the last piece of many pathways to funding is philanthropy. Philanthropy support for journalism isn't one thing. And in our lab, that 5 million final number, there are many different pathways publishers took to get to that point. There are, I won't say the usual suspects, but there are the more familiar funders who have a long track record of supporting journalism, like, for example, the Knight Foundation or Lenfest, who've been at this a while and have a long history of recognizing the value of journalism. And even platform companies like Google and Facebook Journalism Project, Twitter is looking for ways to get involved. So there is a bucket of organizations that have recognized and funded journalism. But what we saw in our lab is that there is an entirely additional set of foundations and funders that actually may not have even thought about journalism as a thing to fund, but that our publishers have had success at suggesting that if you as a funder care about civic engagement, about healthy communities, about informed communities. I mean, the data is very clear that informed communities are engaged communities. Local news sources are the most trusted sources. So really, if you're a funder looking for local impact and civic health, I actually have a hard time identifying an enterprise that you could support that would be more aligned with those goals than a leading local news organization. So what we've seen in the last few years, and if you read Inside Philanthropy or Chronicle of Philanthropy, there has been a steady drumbeat of increased support from new funders in putting dollars behind local journalism because of the need for trusted information and because of the impact and audience reach that journalists have. So I think we have a story to tell that is especially urgent given the range of challenges we all face in our communities and nationally. So that's a whole nother set of funding opportunities. And then there are direct donations, and that's both sort of crowdfunding, I have called it in other places, the Bernie Sanders model, $10 at a time and, 1 million people, and that adds up. But also large individual donors, people who have the capacity, who have maybe quietly appreciated your work and frankly didn't realize that there was a problem there. So many pathways to funding. It is not one size fits all, and you'll hear examples from the publishers today. So, the nut graph from that really to me is that rather than seeing philanthropy as some kind of a canary in a coal mine indicating all our other approaches have failed, I really do believe that the work of developing a journalism project that is worthy of philanthropic support makes us more laser focused at journalism that promotes civic good. So a few practical steps along the journey that we worked with our publishers on. I mean, this is a bit of an eye chart, but it gives you a sense of when we talk about community listening and mapping your network, it's actually not a drive-by process. It's a rigorous process that I'd like to think you're never done with listening to your community and growing your network. And it is all the stakeholders that can support your journalism in all the ways that that means. I mean, it could be financial support. It could be helping you represent communities that have been undercovered. It can be helping you get the story right. It can be checking and sourcing. We have, particularly at the local community level, where we have those long relationships, we may underestimate the value of our networks. I think you'll hear a couple examples of that today. And mining the relationships that you've earned is a foundational step to developing true worthy philanthropic projects. And this is, I mean, apologies for a Venn diagram. Who knew there'd be math or geometry? But I do think this is our simplest, best way to represent what is the sweet spot. I mean, that spot in the middle is what I think we've seen works best for journalism funded by philanthropy. It's not an abrogation of editorial standards or editorial priorities. It is a combination of the newsroom doing its editorial work of, from our listening, what do we understand to be worthy journalism projects? From our community engagement, what are we hearing from our community of jobs to be done that journalism would be a good response to? And then from our networking, what are the priorities that we are hearing from funders that they, efforts that they would support? And so ideal projects to be funded through philanthropy land in that sweet spot, or to credit Larry Lee, publisher of the Sacramento Observer, is you're trying to identify the unity of purpose. And if you check these three boxes, good things happen all the way around, not just for you and your journalism funding, but really for your community. I mentioned briefly, I think we need to be better at telling our own stories. This is an example from the Tampa Bay Times of a community impact report that they released. I mean, most newsrooms won't have the marketing department and the resources to do something as detailed as they did. If you have a minute, I would Google and download this report, however, because it does a fantastic job of documenting not just stories, but the impact that those stories had on the communities they served. And in an earlier presentation today on trust, we heard from the day where they received and shared examples from their readers of the ways in which readers benefited from their local journalism. So, I think we have, trying to be good journalists, kept ourselves out of the story and focused on telling stories of people in our communities, but we're at an inflection point where we really do also have to tell the story of the impact our journalism has. And then I think I covered this, but visual helps underline that the right way, another common question is, so what's the right way to fund my project? And the answer isn't facetious. It really does depend on the project, the community, and the kind of support you're looking for. So these are the 4 pathways that we saw work for different publishers. Anything from, a Report for America grant, which you've got a couple of Report for America recipients right here on the stage, to a large grant from a funder like Knight, down to very small micro donations from people who read a letter to the editor and just send a check, to that one local resident who's been a longtime reader, values the paper, had other things going on and didn't actually realize how dire the financial circumstances are for many local news outlets, and they write a significant check that enables an entire journalism project. So the right pathway is market specific and project specific, but there's more than one way to make this a sustainable component of your overall journalism funding. There's a couple examples I'll quickly mention, and we have published case studies, have a link later where you can find these. But for some of the larger publishers in our lab, these examples stand out for what's possible when you identify that unity of purpose. So the Post and Courier put together a campaign called Uncovered, which had a powerful meaning. First was that as local publishing struggles from a business model standpoint, more and more stories go uncovered, especially in rural communities. And the second meaning, of course, is applying investigative journalism to hold the powerful accountable. And so through this campaign of Uncovered, they were able to take some of the work that they were doing in their core readership area and push out into rural communities and extend that same reporting and really hold the powerful accountable in places where there was no longer that kind of a check. And so that was the basis for their funding ask to their community, which initially was a crowdfunded direct donation campaign. And what they saw is that in the process of making the case and presenting their community with a real value proposition that was very clear, that watchdog function, it surfaced people they probably never would have found through Googling, wealth databases, et cetera, so on. And individuals stepped forward as well and made significant donations. And all told, by the end of the lab, they were able to actually get a $1 million grant from the Ford Foundation to spin up, I'm flipping my examples. This is New Orleans. And they're statewide, it's a state that has famously ranked high for corruption. And so they were able to get, with this grant from the Ford Foundation, the ability to take their local coverage in the New Orleans area and take that team statewide and expand their investigative team, which is really a significant benefit for that state. Sacramento Observer, I mentioned Larry Lee, longest operating Black publisher in South Central California. They were able to triple their news staff through actually multiple different pathways. They had a combination of community foundation grants, an RFA reporter, a partnership pitch with the local public media station, direct donations from longtime readers once they made the ask. And so, that is a significant, to go from 2 to 6 editorial folks in your newsroom. I think for many of you who have those smaller staffs, that's huge. and then I skipped ahead and the Post and Courier example. Not only did they ultimately not only able to fully fund their investigative team, but then they've now been able to add a fully funded education team from a single large donor and be able to spring up a dedicated 3-person team that will focus solely on education issues. So these are some of the, in terms of defining the possible, these are huge impacts for these organizations. So, those are a couple that we've published case studies on, and you can read more on the LMA website. But at this point, I would much rather have you hear directly from publishers in smaller communities that share many of your challenges and have them share their journey of how they went about trying to find philanthropic support to do local journalism. And happy to start off in Biloxi, Mississippi, and have Blake Kaplan share the story of the Sun Herald.
Cool. Thank you, Frank. It's great to be here. As Frank said, I'm here to tell the story of the Sun Herald in Biloxi. And the thing I want to leave you with and tell you is that if we can raise money for a community-funded journalism reporter, a community-funded position, journalism position in Biloxi, you can do it here. You can do it wherever you are. I was pleased to hear my new friends in Keene are taking part in the second lab. So good luck to you guys. I look forward to seeing what you guys are able to pull off. Frank gave you the outline that we learned in the class. Most of it I agree with. You'll see some variations where I didn't find this part particularly helpful, but I think that's to be expected. Not everyone's going to have the same experience. So, let's go down. Okay. So we were able to get a vaccine reporter, particularly timely with the pandemic, and I'll go into the backstory. The first thing we did was we put together a team. We actually had 3 people participate in the lab. I do want to endorse Frank's lab. It's a great learning experience. It's great to be with people who are trying to do the same type things you are. And it was amazing for me as a small publisher to see the big publishers like the Post and Courier and the Advocate raise more than $1 million. Obviously, we didn't set our goal at $1 million in Biloxi, but we'll get to that in a second. So we had Lauren Walk and Adam Waxman. Lauren's our senior editor in Biloxi. Adam is sort of our fundraising guru in McClatchy. So Frank talked about listening sessions, going out, talking to the community. We did that. As he said, we were ordered to do that. We didn't find it all that helpful. So that was my experience. So when we got with a lot of people in the community, they had not sat down and thought about what is the big picture problem we're trying to solve. What they typically asked was, well, I've got you here. We sure would like more coverage of our company. We sure would like more coverage of our county. So they asked for more coverage, for them, but they weren't really able to conceptualize the big picture problem. I mentioned that we got the coaching from Frank. So we told him this. If you're in the session, you get to have one-on-one calls with Frank and others. And he gave us some good feedback. So obviously, we're paying attention to the news. You may have heard there's a pandemic. Mississippi was the lowest in the terms of vaccination rate. I'm not sure if we're still the lowest as of today. I was telling Frank at lunch, Alabama may have edged us out. We may be 49 or 48, but wherever we are, it's not good. We really had a hard time selling the idea of being vaccinated in Mississippi. There's a lot of reasons for that. We've done some stories on that, but our vaccination rate was going nowhere. So we decided to fundraise for a vaccine reporter who could draw more interest to this topic. We saw Mississippi was last in the nation. So we approached some funders. The ask, I think, is the most important part. we went to funders and said, look, we've got this big community problem and we need to work together to solve it. And that resonated with them. I think if a publisher, and Frank kind of touched on this in his remarks, I think if a publisher went to Chevron, who was one of our sponsors, and said, you know what, we're missing too many cop stories at nights after we've gone home, and I just really need a night cops reporter. Well, that's your problem. That's not a community problem to help solve. So make sure the ask is kind of big picture. Make sure the ask is global, and make sure you've got a firm grasp on the ask. So Adam, I mentioned, he's kind of our corporate fundraiser. And he does fundraising for a lot of different properties. It did not work so well in Mississippi. Adam would call people up. If he could even get a return call, they'd be like, who are you? You know, where's Blake? So I've been in Biloxi for 27 years. Again, I'll go back to my friends at the Keene paper. You guys have been here a while. You know the movers and shakers. So you should have no problem finding the people that are influential in this community, have money, and are willing to help, can see the global picture of whatever the problem is you're trying to solve. I know Frank was particularly interested in this point that most of our funders wound up being people I knew in advance, with one exception. So to break it down, we got $10,000 from the Gulf Coast Community Foundation. We had been asking them to help first with RFA, which they weren't able to do, but they were able to help us with this community funded position. They also agreed to host our fund. So I would strongly recommend that you find a community foundation that is willing to host your funds. That way all the contributions go to the community foundation, not you, and your funders get a tax break. So the community foundation not only gave us $10,000, but also hosted our fund. So I mentioned Adam really didn't do well trying to do fundraising out of market. So I knew I had to step in, go meet with people. And that's exactly what I did. I held a series of meetings over several months. We worked on this for many, many months, and I was finally able to get the money. We got, as I mentioned, we got $10,000 from the Community Foundation. We got $5,000 from Chevron, $10,000 from Mississippi Power. We got $5,000 from a local lawyer, and then some smaller donations of $500 from a political consultant. $1,000 from a local businessman, here and there, until we wound up with the amount that we needed. So we started recruitment. We put an ad on journalismjobs.com, and we found the one, Isabella Murray. She's a Minnesota Golden Gopher, had worked at a political website in Iowa during the presidential campaign, was looking for a job. She answered the ad, and she is now in Biloxi writing about vaccines. We love her. So how much did we raise? $36,000. So that's what McClatchy determined was going to take about, was what we needed for 6 months of salary and benefits, editor's time, overhead, all the stuff. That's the number we came at to get 6 months of employment. So we were able to raise $36,000, and that's going to pay for Isabella for 6 months. She started in July, and we have her through January. So Frank talked about impact. I don't think there's any better impact than the journalism. So let's take a look at these. She wrote about an unvaccinated nurse died of COVID. Her loved ones want to warn vaccine skeptics. Coast hospitals are dealing with COVID crisis. What Coast should know as Ida looms. She did a really excellent story about compassion fatigue. She spent a lot of time in the ER talking to nurses who were frankly just getting frustrated with unvaccinated people coming in there. And their level of compassion that they were able to give someone who could have taken steps to improve their health and had not, their compassion fatigue was running low. We had another one that COVID cases surged on the coast. The patients just seemed to get younger and younger. So this is an example of Isabella's work, and we're very proud of it. Now, the idea was to have Isabella just write about vaccines. But, if a hurricane comes through, everybody in our newsroom is a hurricane reporter. And so Isabella was on hurricane duty one night when Hurricane Ida came through a couple of weeks ago. And she found on Twitter that someone had come to the coast. So we let her have a little bit of fun. Here it is. I don't know if you know who Devin Booker is. He is a point guard for the Phoenix Suns, Frank's team. He's from Moss Point. He came home to dedicate some basketball courts the day before Ida, and he brought his girlfriend, Kylie Jenner, with him. Interestingly enough, second most read story on our website this month. I wish the Kardashians would vacation in the Mississippi Gulf Coast. That would be great for readership. But yeah, so, you'll probably go home, and a couple of weeks from now, you'll remember this presentation. You'll be like, oh yeah, Kylie Jenner came to the Gulf Coast. Okay, so what are some takeaways? Start early. Fundraising takes time. It takes time to get meetings. It takes time to make a pitch. It takes time to follow up. As much as we want it to be one meeting and write a check, it doesn't always work that way. It rarely works that way, actually. It's okay for editors to ask for money. Everything in journalism is changing. If you've been in the journalism world as long as I have, I've got 30 plus years experience, things are changing. The big papers are asking for money. I used to think publishers and advertising managers were the ones to ask for money, and there was a strict line to the executive editor in the newsroom, and you do not ask for money. Well, things are changing. In my shop, we don't have a publisher in Biloxi anymore. So we have an executive editor / general manager, and that's me. So it's perfectly okay to ask for money. The big papers are doing it all the time. We took a lot of recognition, or we took a lot of notice of what they were doing at the Seattle Times, or correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, they have raised over $10 million and pay for 1/3 of their newsroom through philanthropic funding. So it's, they're a great role model. Leverage your network. I talked about, basically I just called up people I knew. Then actually in one example, a person I knew offered to hit up somebody I didn't know, and we got $1,000 out of them. I was really hoping they'd be like 5,000, but it was only 1,000. But we'll take it. The people in the community who are going to have money. The people who are likely to help out. So leverage your network if you've been there a long time. And even if you haven't, start identifying, do your op research about who it is you need to go talk to. I already mentioned, ask your community foundation to help, even if they're only hosting the money. Donations are tax deductible. And then, make sure that you're asked. Again, I think the ask is the most important part. It's the tone, it's how you ask. And can you sell that you're solving a community problem? With that, thank you.
I'm going to suggest, Blake, that the top takeaway so far today is come for the Kardashians, stay for trusted COVID coverage. Am I right? You hit so many things that I feel are important to underscore. What an insight. I mean, you actually had a corporate resource to help with fundraising, but what you found is that it was about being in the community that made the most difference. I appreciate your candor in your own journey around the asking for money, being on the editorial side. But I also just want to underscore what you said about getting the ask right, and I showed that Venn diagram of the unity of purpose. So, you're going to a chef. Well, this is when we were having the coaching sessions, the thing I was so impressed by, and the body of work. I mean, I hope just seeing that you all are inspired the way I am by the concrete, like that's dollars getting put to work for good in the community. Those stories are outstanding. So just connect the dots on like when you're talking to one of these local businesses. I mean, the alignment of purpose was affecting the COVID being out of control in the community was making it hard
for them. I mean, it's affecting their business. It's affecting our business. Let's work together to try and solve a community problem. I mean, Mississippi's vaccination rate is among the lowest. We just popped up in the top of the nation in the last week in deaths per capita. These are not, statistics that you want to be first in. So the quicker this gets over and the quicker we get back to normal is a benefit for them, for us, and our whole community.
Yeah, I mean, so that's just such a great illustration of that when you have alignment. I mean, that's great journalism that also is hyper relevant for local leaders to support. And then the last piece, what was that you told me a story when we were coaching of like one of the, you set up these appointments with people you knew, and you went to a breakfast with one of the guys, and what was his to pitch him?
Yeah, his name was Dave Dennis. He was a local businessman, and we had breakfast, and I gave him the pitch, and he's like, "Well, Blake, I always enjoy seeing you and having breakfast with you, but we probably could have done this on the phone in about 10 minutes. I would have written the check for you."
So lesson. Again, we underestimate the earned legacy of trust and the value of those relationships. And in some cases, it's literally we just haven't made the ask. We haven't made a compelling ask. And so tapping the untapped value that we've earned over time of our journals. So thank you. Great work. And hope you can find more funding to keep her on.
Thank you.
And with that, so we don't want to suggest that this is like easy and a magic bullet. And so I'm really glad to have Tracy Bauer here with Adams Publishing. And the Bozeman paper was the focus, and we'll hear about that. But I think Tracy also has things that are relevant to share about. This is a journey, not a quick fix. And sometimes the most valuable lessons we learn are in the challenges.
Thank you, Frank. I'm going to try to do this with the mask on, but if you can't hear me, it may have to come off. Sorry. So Adams Publishing Group has about 130 titles. Most of them are very, very small markets. Some of them are small markets, and a few of them are medium-sized markets. To date, across the company, we have raised microfunding and, of course, Report for America reporters. In a couple of cases, we have also, across APG, brought in major donations from organizations like Microsoft and MIT, University of Oregon. But the story I'm going to tell you about Bozeman, we're still a little bit behind my two peers here, and that we are still shaping the initiative. So I'm going to take you through what that sort of looks like. It looks a lot different now than it did when we launched it. But I think that if you're considering going this route, these will be important things to know going in. So no. Okay. So right now the status, what we've done to date in Bozeman is a little bit of pre-reporting to sort of shape the job to be done. We have sort of defined our network, which is the community, all of the people in the community that the Daily Chronicle touches, from our advertising network to our community foundation to subscribers. So everybody that our organization and the community touches, we sort of mapped that out as part of the homework that Frank gave us when we joined the cohort. And then we set out on a listening tour to talk to the community about the jobs to be done. We already knew going in, and the reason we were interested in Bozeman joining the LMA initiative was we knew going in that Bozeman was really at a crossroads as a community. It's a mountain town in Montana where a lot of the nation's or the world's most affluent people have property. A lot of people are moving there, especially given the work from wherever era that we're in. It's a beautiful place. It's a lot of things to do outdoors. Big sky is what you hear a lot when you hear about this community. So it's a very, very attractive place to be. A lot of people want to be there. But because of that, the community was never really built for the popularity that it's seeing right now. So of course, that has introduced a lot of issues. So we knew that there was a job to be done. I think going in, we assumed a little more that it was land and dollars reporting. And we found out during the listening tour that we were way, we needed to really broaden the scope because we were missing the boat on a couple of areas that I'm going to talk about. So after the listening tour, you build the plan, but for us it was have your seed of an idea, go do some listening, come back, rebuild the plan, go back out to the community, continue learning, kind of shape based on the listening tour. So we had a very different experience with our listening tour than Blake described. And I think that probably, Frank, you've seen that in all of these, that it's not a cookie cutter scenario. So for us, the listening tour was everything. It really helped us shape and reshape the plan. And then we went out and we worked on a relationship with the Community Foundation. Turned out to be one of the most difficult parts of this because of turnover, both at the Daily Chronicle and at the Community Foundation. The pandemic had them distracted for many months. So getting that on track was a little bit difficult. I'm happy to say, are very on track with them now and are ready to plan community events now that things are starting to open back up. And then next phase is meet with potential donors. We've done some of that. We have not gone out for the big ask at this point because we really want to make sure we have this shaped before we go out and ask for money for something that we're not sure what it's going to go for. So just a little more background on Bozeman, just so that you can see the scope of the problem here. Bozeman leads the nation as one of the fastest growing communities, certainly one of the most expensive communities to both buy a home and buy land or to rent in this community. So there's a real gulf between the haves and the have-nots, and that's only getting wider and wider. So it's not just a matter of a lot of rich people are moving to Bozeman and buying up the land, and that makes the community look different. That's what you see on the surface, but what we found underneath was that during the listening tour, there are all kinds of impacts around education, the environment, social issues, the culture, even politics. Bozeman's also very, very conservative community, but a lot of the people coming in to the community to work in some of the service roles are introducing new politics into Bozeman. So what does that look like around social issues? A couple of the people on the listening tour were most concerned about what was going to happen culturally in Bozeman as we have the people who have lived there for a long time, who sort of shaped the community for many, many decades. And now we have a new kind of demographic moving in, and what's that going to look like? So again, going back to land and dollars, that's something that wasn't really on the roadmap. Is with as much clarity as we found in the listening tour. And the session we listened to this morning on trust, I just wish that, if anything, the lab, I think that now that we have more research around that, injecting some more of that kind of thing into what we go out to do, because what we did find in Bozeman was, as I said, a very, very conservative community. A lot of what we heard was that there's a perception of that the newspaper is much more liberal and quote unquote out of touch with the community. And that is something that has really had us take a step back, not necessarily to make major changes to get money, but to really say, we're hearing this a lot. Is there something we need to look at as far as perception of our own news products? So the listening tour was good for that. But also all of these other issues around culture, social issues, and the environment really, continues to help shape this initiative. One of the important things is a lot of this kind of coverage is it's easy to do on an academic level, but it's very difficult to find the kind of expertise in writing and reporting that's required to put context around this and to really help the community through what's at stake, because there's that element of we have the what, but what's the so what? And you can't do that with a reporter who's also trying to cover general assignment, do the night cop shift, write the festival story. You cannot do that with a general assignment reporter. So we really wanted to go out and find expertise around some of these issues of the environment and social issues, and really zero in on expert coverage of higher level enterprise and investigative work. One of the tenets of the lab or the LMA initiative is that you really need to define something. And as I think Frank was mentioning, is you can't just go out to the community and say, and Blake also underscored this, we need a night cops reporter so that we can spend more time covering this other thing. No, we really wanted to sort of move this over into its own specialty area. And the Community Foundation agreed to work with us only under the condition that we not do this just as the Daily Chronicle, but that we brought others, other news organizations in the community into the same initiative, so that it was more of a collaborative, so that as we were raising funding, they could work for the whole community and not just the Daily Chronicle. More of what I just talked about, just underscoring the higher level work that these folks would be detached to do only that. This is a little more about the Growth Lab and how we've shaped it and reshaped it. First of all, it's engaging the community. We have to really challenge some of the assumptions. Some of our own assumptions, as I say, were challenged in the beginning, but I think that if you take what we've learned out into the broader community, a lot of what they assume the issues are, land and dollars. I think if superficially the community is looking at our roads can't handle all the people coming in, that's what we see every day. But what we don't see every day is some of the underlying social and cultural issues that we need to report. So really helping the community understand that, and what does that look like in storytelling formats that we have access to. And then, finding similar communities. There are other communities who are in this boat. Where Adams also owns the news organization in Boise, Idaho, and they're struggling with the same kinds of issues. So we're applying some of what we're hearing on this listening tour to, hey, it is the same kind of thing happening in Boise, for example, and in a couple of our other markets where we're seeing this kind of growth and wealth. And then, this is really the bottom line, is what we want to do is, empower the community to make better decisions through better information and explanation. So this is where we are with the ask and sort of the build out of the lab. Again, these would be dedicated reporters. We want high level enterprise investigative workers, investigative work reporters, but we also want a pool of freelancers who have expertise in data, the environment, and some of these other issues. An engagement editor, and then other resources such as databases and other tools, for a grand total of $170,000 for the first year. This is probably the most important slide on here. Some of the snags that we hit that we're now applying in other communities where we're exploring local funding. One is that, we didn't foresee changes in our community foundation. They were a big part of this going in, and had we to do it over again, we probably would have not relied so much on the partnership and let them get some of the issues they had to get out of the way, especially with the pandemic and all of our communities foundations have been involved in through the pandemic, and moved ahead more swiftly. I think we were waiting on them when really we didn't have to. The listening tour, again, I can't say this enough. It challenged our assumptions. It sent us back to rethink the scope of the project. It had us looking at our own coverage just even immediately, like, when we do mid-level, high-level enterprise work, do we have the right voices at the table? And the answer to that is no. In a lot of cases, I thought today's session on who do you need at the table and who don't you have and who do you need to bring in was so important. And then, the in-person events, especially when there's an issue of trust in local media and our communities, we did what we had to do virtually, but as soon as it's safe to come together again, we should not rely on technology because we can. I think that the importance of bringing people together is, it's just essential in something like this when you're talking about reshaping how the community is going to grow, not just your newspaper's part in it, but the entire community. I just don't feel like that's a job for Zoom. And again, we did it because we had to, but moving forward, I would not say, let's do a virtual town hall because we can. That can be a piece of it, but we need to really lead the way in bringing people back together again. And then politics. Like I said, Bozeman is very, very conservative. The whole discussion around AP content and trust and liberal, the perception of us being out of touch and more liberal than our community, it's real, whether it's true or not. The perception is real, and we're dealing with a lot of that, and it's more of our communities than Bozeman, but I think industry-wide, we're sort of tackling this issue of trust and credibility and the politics that, the last several years have put in our way, so.
Thank you, Tracy.
Mhm.
There's a lot there. I would invoke the iceberg analogy where 90% is below the surface. You only see, so you see the 10% when somebody announces a grant. I think it's really valuable for folks to see all the work that needs to go on below the surface. And I love the way you talked about, and again, it varies from publisher to publisher, but the different levels of value you got out of the listening tour, both in challenging assumptions about the problem definition, but also real, do you have in your community, do you have a trust issue? Are you assuming that the community is ready to follow you on an issue, or do you need to actually bring some more voices to the table? Those are huge takeaways, and I hope folks benefit from seeing the levels of work that are required to really put together the right kind of ask. I mean, this is deep work, strategic work versus sort of the just in time. I mean, one of the virtues, Blake, of being 49th or 50th, right, is you had a indisputable right now urgent ask that everybody could just agree to. Tracy, the Bozeman team chose to take on something that's complex over time, right? So, I mean, I hope folks take away that iceberg benefit. Quick follow-up, because you also applied some of these principles in other markets. Any quick wins to share from some of the other items?
Yeah, so one of our markets is Klamath Falls, Oregon, and same toolbox, going out to really study a problem and try to find funding to specialize in that area. And so Klamath Falls, Oregon has a really bad problem with drought. And we've hired through funding from Microsoft, MIT, and the University of Oregon. We've funded reporting resources to help the community with some explanatory journalism and higher level enterprise that would absolutely not have been possible without.
Fantastic, thank you. And a quick plug, if you're watching remotely or here in the audience, hopefully we'll be sure to have time to take as many questions as possible. So please put those in the chat if you're remote. But now eager to hear from Manuel Coppola at Nogales International, and particularly around this, we've talked a little about making the ask and seeing it not as a handout, but as a partnership. And then, being personal about stating and articulating the value our journalism provides to communities. So Manuel, over to you.
Thank you, Frank. So prior to joining the cohort, and I'd heard about crowdfunding and philanthropic sources for for-profit newspapers, I turned my nose up at the notion that legitimate local organizations would even accept handouts, quote unquote. In fact, our parent company, WIC Communications, had established a widget on our page for donations, and I arrogantly asked the digital team to remove that from our site. We don't need that. But not before I noticed that a handful of donations, averaging about $20, had streamed in. And I think that kind of planted the seed that there may be something to this. Then one day, my CEO, Francis Wick, he encouraged me to look into the LMA Seattle Times Philanthropic Lab opportunity, as well as Report for America. With COVID-19 upon us and my ad sales tanking, I said to myself, why not? What do I have to lose? We were fortunate to be among the few selected for the lab. There's out of like 52 applicants. And we were also picked to participate in Report for America. I knew that the odds of snagging both were slim, so this had to be a good sign, a good omen. I soon learned that the lab facilitators like Frank and Joaquin Alvarado was mentioned, my lab peers, that yes, the pandemic represented a unique opportunity for fundraising, but there's also a continued and growing interest in public funding for journalism projects, even before the whole COVID thing. The fact is that along with our legacy revenue model of advertising and subscriptions, there's an expanding role among philanthropic donors to help make our operations sustainable for myriad reasons. I wanted to be part of that bandwagon, so I scaled the fear of asking and soon found out that there were organizations that felt helping local journalism survive is worthwhile, especially if you tap into a community need or something that they might feel the community needs from a newspaper. This was so we did, and it was uplifting to hear from some of these folks, and they would specifically reference the good work we have done at the Nogales International, as Terry referenced and Pete before him. It was surprising to get that kind of reinforcement from our readers and others. They particularly liked our focus for the LMA project, which was to give voice to monolingual Spanish-speaking residents within our community. 80% of our households are Spanish-speaking, and many of those do not speak English at all. And too often, they're excluded from local decision-making participation. And we scaled down the project. Ours was equally as ambitious and wide. Initially, it was all about focusing on that segment of the community, art, business. And so I felt that we needed to scale it down. And after our listening tour and discussing with my managing editor, we narrowed it down to this particular project. So I also tested the waters among my readers by writing an op-ed highlighting our renewed efforts through philanthropy to help save the legacy of our 96-year-old newspaper. And that's a very positive legacy. Once again, the response was heartening because folks again responded. Besides encouraging comments and emails, we received a $5,000 donation from a recent Michigan transplant who told us she reads our paper front to back. We were sent smaller donations as well. Charlie, whose mom used to be a reporter for us in the 1980s, sent us a check underscoring the need to preserve the government watchdog. A few weeks later, he called and asked me to pick up a second check at his house. I went over and we talked for about an hour on his porch as he chain smoked and we solved the world's problems. I realized these donors are not ATMs. They think and feel and have definite opinions and deserve to be acknowledged one way or another. Every donor, emailer, letter writer heard back from me. It was exhilarating and a reminder of what our mission is all about. So the power of the op-ed. With the money raised, I reached out to our different universities. Frank had some connections at ASU and they proved to be most fruitful. And we gathered a batch of prospects. But Lydia Terrazas from ASU seemed to be the perfect fit. She was fully bilingual, literate in Spanish, and savvy in digital tools. She actually grew up on the border and as a child worked with our targeted demographic, picking fruit in the fields alongside her mother. So these are the folks that stepped up. The Community Foundation. I am a member of an affiliate of the Regional Community Foundation, and I first approached them and got them to come up with $5,000. But in the meantime, I knew the bigger prize was with the Regional Foundation. And so it just so happened that my CEO, Francis Wick, had a personal relationship with the outgoing CEO, And so we arranged for a phone call. I made my pitch, and we went round and round with that for a while and a few phone calls. And right around Christmas, he came back to tell me that he would match the affiliates' contribution and add another $5,000. So we were halfway to our goal of funding Lydia for 6 months of the project. Out that to be, Seattle was one of the first to seed money for us, and with that in hand, I could go and say, hey, this foundation believes in the project, and so it was a little easier to sell with the rest. And also, I think I needed to get my company, since we are a for-profit organization, and I feared that question, what's a for-profit newspaper doing raising donations? And so I wanted to at least show, I never got that question, but I wanted to show that my company was backing us up and they had skin in the game. That also made a world of difference. And Frank, I don't know, I've got a video here, but I don't see how to. Well, that was a video of Lydia introducing the project to the community. She did a video and explaining, what we were trying to do to bring these folks out of the shadows and have them participate in government and other decision making and social issues and health, mental health. We needed to open, the hope was to help open doors for them. Lydia's first story about how the city council nixed the call to the public item on the agenda caused a stir among the politicians, including the mayor, who, after the story aired or published, he called my CEO to complain and tell him that we were picking on him. Nevertheless, 7 days later, he restored the item on the agenda, as well as the public's ability to have a voice in local government. And that's Anna Doan, my friend from long ago, and she's quite the activist, and she was one of the first to take advantage of that newly found opportunity. These are some of the other stories that Lydia wrote. These were distance learning poses special challenges to English learner students. Programs available in Santa Cruz County, but awareness can be lacking. Again, the resources to inform that segment of our population aren't there. And there's a newly formed group, Youth on the Border, and they recognized that situation and they began boosting their story or their opportunities in Spanish. Santa Cruz County Patriots, another new group, see fertile ground for conservatism in local community. And that was a story essentially highlighting the fact that our population is very conservative. I don't know that they align themselves particularly. Actually, most don't align themselves with the Republican Party. But there is a very conservative portion of the community, and these folks are starting to work on it and hopefully organize, I think. and tapping into their conservatism versus the politics that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years. Like with Blake, Lydia, she had a break from her project. And we had a 18-wheeler that arrived in town being chased by police, and he wouldn't stop. And he placed a lot of motorists in danger, and it culminated in a shooting at a Walmart parking lot. They were shooting at the truck or the police, multiple shots. It's about 2 blocks away from the newspaper. Lydia went down there, and while the bullets were flying, she was covering and did a wonderful job for us. And so there was that flexibility with Lydia. But Univision recognized the good work that she was doing, and they came and they took her from me. 5 months into the project, she had 1 more month to go, but I was very proud that we could send her on her way to bigger and better things. So my takeaways, it was good to have. So before we even raised the money, I was recruiting. And so by the time we had the money, Lydia was ready to go. And she hit the ground running with powerful stories, which helped reinforce the funders. Like, this is what we're doing. This is the type of thing you're going to see with Lydia in this project. The Community Foundation actually came to me recently offering more funding. So I need to recruit reporters, actually, and that's where we're at right now. I think we can raise the money, but I need reporters. I've written letters and otherwise continue to reach out to private funders, as was stressed during our lab. It's a long-term relationship, not an ATM. We were tapped for funding by Report for America, which helped reinforce the fact that we were on the right track. So long story short, I became a believer.
Thank you, Manuel. And I mean, again, I hope folks are inspired. I'm inspired by seeing the concrete reporting that results. And, there you have the evidence that here's the Community Foundation coming back, seeing the quality of the reporting that results and wanting more of that. So I love it illustrates just the power of making a case for a kind of reporting that's needed, empowering the monolingual community and giving them a voice, and then the impact, like the mayor. I love stories like that. So, and then you can see how your conversation with funders and supporters, when you're able to point to that kind of reporting, it becomes a virtuous instead of a vicious cycle of support where folks want to see more of that. And I would say congratulations to you on your journey from, hard to ask for a handout to, and I mean, I guess I could just ask you, say a little more about, what it felt like as the publisher when you wrote that editorial piece. And I remember you reached out to, like, I wrote the piece and somebody gave me a check. What do I do now? I mean, I do want to underline that we have earned in our communities value for the history of the work that we've done and just what that was like so once you began down that journey, the kind of feedback that you got from the community when you kind of provided the picture of, well, here's what's going on for our paper and the challenges we face and the response that led to.
So it wasn't, talking about our problems. It wasn't about crying that we can't afford to run this newspaper anymore, but that we wanted to preserve the legacy. And I think, thankfully, our community is very tied into and understands the significance of the Nogales International as its sole community newspaper. And so I wanted to tap on that and also, that we are facing challenges, and we want to do above and beyond what we have in our newsroom right now. We want to do this special project, and that will require some help. And sure enough, checks $250. They started coming in along with the notes. Some of them were handwritten. A lot of it was emailed. So that just reinforced I knew I was on the right path.
Yeah, well, congratulations. And I hope all three of these stories are inspiring to you. I mean, we have earned, as journalists in our communities, this kind of relationship of trust. And in some cases, we just haven't made the ask. And the listening process for some will help you check assumptions about what it is actually that the community needs from you, and then also what they would fund, because some of the things that they may need, you may learn, there isn't yet funding for that. So I think you've heard both sort of the deep work that probably needs to be involved, but also some of the secret sauce of what can help you get to yes. We have one more opportunity to share with you, which is the 2021 Local News Fund, but I want to be sure we try to take, if we have a couple questions, we'll get one from chat and then here in the room. Terry?
So this is from the chat. A small town of 2,500 in Minnesota was given more than $150,000 and counting for projects, schools, school, theater from an alum who learned about her hometown needs through the local weekly newspaper. She lives 1,500 miles away. And newspapers and these organizations do a better job of making the case that they can spur economic development.
Blake may have a direct, but I mean, the overly short answer would be yes. And again, I think it goes back to the team mentioned, we just started the second cohort of our funding lab. I had my first coaching call this week, and I was speaking with the editor-in-chief about going back to the reporters in their newsroom and asking each reporter, tell me what the 3 most impactful stories are that you've done for this community. And then follow-up question, of course, is, and what do you mean by impact? Because I think we wildly undervalue the actual impact we've had. Manuel, I love that, way to cause trouble, and the publisher's getting a call from the mayor, but then the mayor's changing the policy, right? We take for granted that's, I mean, I think we tend to go, well, that's what we do. Well, that's pretty important, and we can't assume everybody knows we do that. And so I guess the longer version of my answer is I think we need to do more work documenting and then telling the story of how we have actually played that role in our communities. And so then you're not making promises, you're not engaged in forward-looking advocacy, you're literally just pointing to your legacy and your history in the community. And again, back to what is that unity of purpose, promoting healthy communities and civic good is a 3-part alignment. Question in the room, yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that initial ask. And even though you knew the people in your community, just to know them and be in your community, this was maybe the first time you were going to ask for support. And so in that first phone call or that first email, how do you approach that? Like, do you just come out and say, this is what I want to do and I want to talk to you about it? Or how do you do that?
And let me just quickly repeat for those remote. It's like, hey, you've got the relationships, but what is that first conversation like? Like literally, what do you say? Do you have a PowerPoint deck? How does the ask happen?
It was different for each person. When I had breakfast with someone, my approach was, hey, we've got this big problem. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that people aren't getting vaccinated in Mississippi, and we're never going to get out of this pandemic. When I met with Chevron, we did a little more formal. We had some charts and graphics and, showed vaccination rates. But it got to the same point, is the sooner we can get past this, the better you and I and the community will be. So I would say the ask needs to be personalized based on how well you know the person. If you're going to meet with a a corporate board or a group, probably, wise to have a presentation. If it's someone that and y'all talk football or whatever y'all do together, I think it could be less formal.
I think before we went out, we were pretty well prepped as far as building our decks. And even if we didn't use the actual decks, it organized our thoughts and helped us, move forward. And especially if we zeroed down what the ask was for and how much you needed.
Yeah, and I'll pile on. I appreciate Manuel because we did another mean frank thing along with the listening tour. We made every publisher in the group, we called it the 5-slide deck, and it was templates of these are the 5 questions that you have to answer. What is the need? Who is the community you'll serve? How will you serve them through journalism? What is the budget and resources you need? And what's your track record for measuring impact? So that pre-work, even if to Blake's point, like if you got a relationship, it might be a more informal conversation, but as Manuel was saying, you have those answers, you've organized, and really I think the Bozeman pitch, you saw the granularity of the structure of the ask. It may be an email invitation to breakfast where you're like, oh, you could have just asked me on the phone because of relationship, but I would strongly recommend doing the iceberg below the surface work, especially in cases where you don't have the relationship. Another question from chat?
Yep. So this question goes to all of you. I'm interested in learning about how to most effectively make the larger philanthropic asks. Specifically, were formal presentations typically used, and some of that was covered just a minute ago, or were informal approaches more effective? How were decision makers identified and approached? Were specific amounts suggested, or was it left to the prospects to decide how much to donate? A lot there, but
yeah. Do you want to talk about, some of the presentations that were put together, by, for example, the Advocate or the Post and Courier? Very elaborate. They got their marketing department involved. They got their graphics department. It was a whole shebang. Compare and contrast to what I did.
Yeah. And I know, radically rural, so we're making some assumptions about staff size of the audience here, but, all the way to the extreme of, I specifically remember NOLA, Times-Picayune. I mean, their first deck was, I think they said it publicly, not ready for prime time. And they went back, Joaquin, from the Times said, you can do better, and send it back. And they pulled their marketing team in. And their final deck had pizzazz. Now, I would argue from the journalism side, all the nifty slides in the world, if it's not hitting that unity of purpose, you're not going to get anywhere. But so generally the coaching journey was the right format. Back to the last question, depends on who you're asking and what you're asking for. So, in Blake's case, it's the ask is built around COVID is making your business harder to run. Here's how our journalism can get at that problem of COVID misinformation. Some of the bigger publishers, they didn't have a relationship. And so the deck becomes much more important. It's a formal pitch process. But even for the large publishers, what we saw in our lab is that relationships matter. After you get the first win, Manuel hires a great reporter who does really good work, and now the Community Foundation sees that and is approaching him to renew. That's the second win. The second win is more than twice as easy to get as the first. So, I think chicken and egg, the network mapping process, when you're diligent, helps you identify who the potential supporters are and what the most relevant approach is, whether it's literally a breakfast or a request to make a formal presentation. And then there's work behind the scenes around donors and donor passion. So the example with NOLA and the Ford Foundation is they did the research on what was Ford Foundation supporting and the Venn diagram of here's what they care about and here's where our journalism overlaps with that. And you go through a series of pitch meetings. So I hate to say that one size doesn't fit all. It's true, but the core principles are relationships are huge. even if you wind up not showing the deck because you have relationship, that the process of putting the deck together really organizes the pitch, and you're able, even if only in conversation, to hit all the key elements. And then the second yes is far easier to get first because you have the journalism to back it up. One last question from the room. Yes.
I have a question. I think it might be specifically for Tracy. It seems like I'm from the Outer Cape, on Cape Cod, and we've had a similar situation with COVID. Our housing market is exploded. Like the price you get up there seems like what we would see for a condo. And I'm finding that there's like part of me sees a huge opportunity for new population of really affluent people in our community. And the other part of that question is like, okay, I want to ask those people for money to help fund our for-profit paper. We also have a nonprofit side as well, but the for-profit side is struggling. How do I ask those folks new to our community to invest in a paper that might be reporting on those specific people entering our community affecting the community negatively? So I'm finding like the housing crisis, we're having an issue staffing workforce, a lot of sort of moving parts there. And I'm wondering, Frank might have more to say on this, if there's any success stories from asking those new community members.
Well, I would say that that's part of our problem in Bozeman, is that the people in the community with the most funding are part of, the problem and the solution, right? So maybe they're not the first to ask, or even second or third. I mean, really, people or corporations who don't have an agenda around the issues, I think are smarter moves to go to first. So corporations that want their name on, healthy community growth, maybe not the billionaire who has a ranch in Bozeman, So we haven't really targeted those. We have a lot of hot, big name celebrities who have ranches and mansions in the Bozeman community, and a lot of that group lives in a separate community called, I think they call it the Yellowstone Club. And it's out of reach. They're part of the community that doesn't feel like they're represented. But again, we need to listen to them, and we need to gain trust in that community. That doesn't mean we have to change the journalism, but we have to listen to their issues. But we haven't gone to those sources. They're not on the radar. Instead, it's people who want their name on this healthy community growth. People or corporations or organizations.
And my quick add would be, because I spent a lot of time in Bend, Oregon, which is a micro version, same problem, I do think the power of the listening piece, where you're genuinely going first to ask questions, which is what we do as journalists anyway. I think what you would find there, what we've seen in Bend, is nobody who's drawn to a place because of its beauty and relocates there wants to be the one who ruins it. Right? So I think the ask is different for different, and I think, Blake, you saw this even within the community on the COVID ask. I mean, if you're a business, you directly see how not managing COVID hurts your business. And so that is how you would talk to a business owner about supporting the COVID reporter. You might have a different conversation about why to support that COVID reporter with a different constituent. So I think the answer is revealed in the listening tour, but what I've seen in Bend is people who have the resources to buy that fancy second home have some recognition of the risk that they themselves create to ruin the very thing that they're attracted to, and that's a basis for having a conversation about let's partner and be sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, to that point, that was my that's why I mentioned the what's at stake. That part of the conversation, the what's at stake for that group of people is different from what's at stake from the people who have to be bussed in every day to work because they can't afford to live there, right? So you sort of tailor the deck to the audience too.
Well, I know we're close on time. We'll stay after. I can stay after for questions here in the room. But in the last 5 minutes, I want to be sure we give you one very practical way to get in the game, so to speak. November 30th is Giving Tuesday. It's a very practical, time sensitive opportunity to have a conversation about crowdfunding in your community of journalism that you're doing, based on the challenges of COVID. Local Media Association launched the COVID Local News Fund last year, and we're able to help publishers, 200 plus publishers, raise over $1 million to support local journalism. And so pleased to invite in via Zoom, if we can get her, Lindsay Estes from Local Media Foundation, talk very briefly about the Local News Fund, which is the 2021 version. Even if you don't have your own giving technology, this is administered through Local Media Foundations, so the 501c3 piece is covered. The platform is GiveButter, which then makes turnkey the actual donation process. And I'll ask Lindsay to take these last 5 minutes to just talk through how you could use this campaign to design a local giving campaign, particularly to take advantage of Giving Tuesday. Lindsay?
Hi, thank you, Frank. It's nice to meet everybody. I'm gonna go as quick as I can through the last few slides, since I know we're at the end of the session. Just know that we do have an information session on Thursday, and all of this information is available on our website. So the Local Media Association team is here to help you guys do a crowdfunding campaign. We have a marketing person, myself, Jay, who's our Chief Operations Officer. So if you do end up deciding to participate, we are all here for you. So this is an overview of the campaign. It is administered by the Local Media Foundation, which is a 501c3. News organizations will create fundraising campaigns to solicit tax-deductible donations from the community. So it's basically like the Local Media Foundation can serve as a fiscal sponsor for a for-profit company. And the funds must be used to execute a journalism project or increase coverage on critical local issues. So it cannot be used to basically pay your electric bill or anything like that. It's anything in addition to what you would already be doing. The platform we're using is GiveButter. It's a complete online donation platform. In order to get started, it's pretty simple. We have an application form that you can fill out, and then we review it, make sure that you qualify, and then you're sent a participant agreement, which you'll answer certain questions in order for us to get your campaign set up. And then LMA provides support in a variety of different ways for your campaign. We provide marketing starter kits. We have meetings every week, and then it goes to every other week with best practices that we explain and share with you what other companies are doing and seeing success. The campaigns will kick off October 4th and will run through December 31st. The timing for this is around the giving season, as Frank mentioned, with Giving Tuesday. Not all campaigns have to launch on October 4th. That's just the first day we'll be launching, and it is a rolling launch from there on out. The topics for the campaigns that people can choose are climate, COVID-19, which goes off of our COVID-19 Local News Fund from last year that Frank mentioned, that had over 200 local media companies raise $1.74 million, investigative reporting, and social justice. So underneath, there's just a couple bullets to give some ideas of what that means within those buckets. So the cost. So GiveButter has some administrative fees that when someone donates, a 3% comes off, and then there's a 3% service charge. We have found that 9 out of 10 donors actually cover that fee, so it is not taken out of the donation money that is received by the company. And then the Local Media Foundation has a 7% fee that covers all of the back-end financial, the tax paperwork, the marketing materials, and processing checks. So if someone were to donate via check, that is where the 7% comes in. On the screen is an example of what the GiveButter platform looks like. There's a header with your logo, and this is a COVID-19 Local News Fund, but we have an image for the 2021 Local News Fund. You can provide a goal, a story, and then there's a running ticker of all the donations, including the comments, which I know Manuel was talking about earlier, that come in with the donations that are really great to have out there. We provide examples of successful campaigns. We have a whole list of these best practices from the COVID-19 Local News Fund, and we'll continue to share them as the 2021 Local News Fund happens. And these are some examples of the marketing materials. There's social media images, there's newsletter images, and we provide sample tweets, sample social media posts, as well as letters from the editor, and pretty much any type of marketing materials that could get you started. So participant qualifications and expectations: you must be an independent or family-owned news organization engaged in regular, original, ongoing news reporting. And you must be focused on, you cannot be focused on advocacy or opinion. So it cannot be politically charged one way or another. It has to be neutral. So next steps, there's an information session on Thursday, and then you would provide or fill out an application to participate. All of the information is on the Local Media Association website. And there is my email if you have any questions. If you have a hard time finding anything, please feel free to email me. Happy to answer any questions or send more information to all of the links. All right, I think that is it, Frank. You can probably answer some questions in the audience, but if anyone has anything, please just let me know.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was really impressive. Those of you in the back timing business know that Lindsay had hardly any time and got through a lot of information really fast. But if you missed it, localmedia.org, you'll find all the information there. And I just circle back to where we began. I hope you found both some inspiration and some perspiration out of these great case studies from, I want to thank the 3 publishers from the lab. And if you want to read more, our white paper, 42 pages, is free to download, also on localmedia.org. And Terry, really appreciate the opportunity to talk with folks at Radically Rural. Thank you.
So thank you so much to Frank and Manuel, Tracy, and Blake, not just for their presentations today, but for their commitment to journalism and for all of the information that they were willing to travel a long distance to share with us. Thanks to everybody that's here in person and the several folks that are online for being part of this today. I hope you'll all be back here tomorrow for our Crazy Good session, Tools for Journalists, which will get going at 10. I hope that folks here are so inclined and will join us at the Keene Sentinel for a little, to continue this conversation, to enjoy a glass of wine, a beer, a drink. Those interested can follow me back, where it's just a short distance. You can see our building from here. Others, I hope you will all join us tonight at Connect, which is a lively networking event being held just a few blocks south of where we are right now. If you just go down Main Street, you'll collide with the signs, I hope, that will direct you to it. It's in a field behind Wyman Tavern. That gets going at 5:30. Attendees from all the tracks from Radically Rural will be there. I can promise you it's wonderful local food. So if you are so inclined, I hope you will join us there. Otherwise, one more thanks to everybody that presented today and for your attention to what I think is important information for small news organizations.